Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall. Today I'm joined by none other than GVS, Geoffrey Verity Schofield, a man who's known for cutting through the noise in the fitness industry with his sharp wit and evidence-based insights. In this episode, we dive into some of the hottest topics in the science-based lifting community. Why is there so much hate for science-based lifters right now? Are they bringing it upon themselves? Or is it a misunderstanding of what truly science-based lifting is all about? Plus, Geoffrey shares his recent experience with a 2.5-week mini cut and also some multi-day fasting. How does he approach this and what does he think the main benefits are? Of course, guys, as always, if you enjoy this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Give us a nice review over on Spotify. Give us a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, or a comment, and also make sure to screenshot it, tag myself, tag Geoffrey, so we know that you're listening to this episode and we can give you some thanks, and also other people know to tune in as well. This episode is packed with value, thought-provoking discussion, and plenty of laughs along the way. If you're a coach, competitor, or a serious gym goer looking to cut through the noise and get results, you won't want to miss it. Let's dive in. So, Jeff, you are the ideal person, I think, to answer this question, at least in my eyes, from what I know and see within the space that we're in, which I don't even know how to define that space. But why is there so much hate for science-based lifters right now? And one of the things we discussed off air is I was going to kind of define it, and I think Jeff Nippert's video is probably the biggest when I search on this topic. His video actually comes up first, which is kind of addressing that kind of quote-unquote hate. And Jeff defined a science-based lifter as someone who tracks their lift, so monitors progression, leaves some reps in reserve now and then, and kind of considers their stimulus to fatigue ratio on, like, in various aspects, whether that exercise selection, again, with a reps in reserve, that sort of thing. And I guess before we address the initial question, do you agree with Jeff's definition of that? Because when I heard it, I was like, are people really criticizing like those aspects? Because at least from the bits and pieces I hear and see, that's not what people are really concerned about.
Yeah, I think that's sort of just the definition of a lifter in general. I mean, almost all serious lifters that I know track their progress in the gym. It's rare to see someone who is a very accomplished lifter, either natural or enhanced, just any side of it, where they have not tracked their progress. I mean, there are so many ways to do it. It is so absolutely essential and integral to the entire process that I wouldn't call that science-based. I would just call that based. That's just something someone should be doing, regardless of if they're science or not science or evidence or what kind of evidence, or they're more practical or in the trenches or whatever. I mean, tracking is something that I think at this point is pretty darn close to universal. And so I wouldn't, I'm going to take that back. I'm not that's something everyone really should be doing. Keeping reps in reserve, personally, I tend to go closer to failure, but I also don't want to be known as like the failure guy or the guy who always goes to failure. I mean, on a cable curl, sure, like I'll take that badge, yeah. But on a squat or something, yeah, I think always going to failure, it's actually really hard to justify that, right? In terms of risk versus reward, in terms of stimulus to fatigue ratio, in terms of just practicality. And so, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily give RPE or RAR to the science-based guys either, because for one reason or another, people have been keeping reps in reserve since people started lifting, right? And so maybe the bro side of things tends to go closer to failure. But then again, if you look at a lot of the newest research, training to failure or very close to it seems to be quite supported. I mean, certainly compared to how the average person trains, if they looked at the recent studies where it says, okay, maybe we should be going closer to failure. So maybe science-based training is going closer to failure than the average person is currently going closer to failure, right? So I'm not sure if I would agree there. So yeah, on either of those two, was there a third one or?
It was essentially kind of considering stimulus to fatigue ratio of like exercise selection and just aspects of training.
Yeah, I think this is maybe science-y, but also kind of biomechanics rolls into that as well. And I'm not sure if I would entirely think that science-based training and just biomechanics are entirely the same thing. They have some overlap. Some people who enjoy a lot of biomechanics content or tend to be more science-based. Um, but I don't really follow a lot of the science-based stuff in my own training, but I do follow a lot of the biomechanics stuff. So I think there's maybe a little bit of a divide there. Certainly, when I see someone doing some tiny isolation exercise and then someone else doing a barbell bent over row, one of these big, sort of compound, heavy hitting, all encompassing body wrecking movements or bodybuilding movements, depending on how you do them. Certainly, the isolation movement, it seems to be a little bit more science based. So, yeah, I guess I could sort of give that one to the science based thing. And it seems to be a little bit more recent, a lot of these movements as well. So, maybe that one, but the other two I think are just much more general than science based.
It's funny. I think Jeff mentioned that exact comparison of like an iliac pull down versus a barbell bent over row in
Yeah.
his video. And he was like, yeah, he put barbell bent over rows, I think like he ranked them and it was lower, whereas the iliac pull down was like S tier. But he was explaining how that wasn't like a based off science. That was just like, on the whole, that's where he sees it. But if you give him context of you have limited time, you're trying to hit a lot of muscles in like one go, he might pick like the barbell bent over row for that reason. But it's funny because I think a lot of people would perceive a science-based lifter just does all these like very isolated like movements, and that's like the science-based program, optimal, if you will, program. It's like that's
Yeah.
not necessarily using science correctly. I don't know if it's almost like science-based lifters aren't necessarily even science-based, like in a weird way, you
Yeah.
know? They're kind of
Well,
bastardizing the science in some way.
yeah, Jeff is a lot more bro than I think a lot of his audience maybe realizes. I mean, he trains hard. I think he rated the bench press as like his favorite exercise or maybe his best chest exercise. He does go at least partially based on preference, which I think is super important. Um, and so he's actually a really nice mix of practicality and then also following the science. Because if you do follow the science exactly, you end up with just complete garbage. I mean, you end up with like the highest possible volume and like the closest to failure and all these sort of weird exercises. And and so yeah, if you actually have a really science-based training plan, it's probably going to put whoever does it 6 feet under, right? It just doesn't. I'm not even sure how the term would work. I think I actually prefer Dr. Eric Helms's. I think he's been promoting more of like an evidence-based approach where it is based in the science, and I am also based in the science to a certain extent. I keep up with it. I'm subscribed to mass. I read papers. I am really, up to date with things because I have to be, and I also am kind of interested in. I am a little bit nerdy, okay, but I'm also a little bit broy, and I think you need both of those sides to get the most out of yourself. Where, yeah, if you're science based, but you're spending way more time reading about training than actually training and actually experiencing the iron, yeah, you're gonna have some troubles, And these are the people who are like anyone big is on steroids or it's all just genetics and that kind of thing. Well, no, it's because they actually like went in there and they learned and they actually sort of felt how they should be moving. You can't really learn a lot of those things in the books or on YouTube, right? A lot of this stuff has to be either like an in-person coach or sometimes just like doing it yourself. Just going in there and being like, okay, well, when I move this way, I don't really feel much, but when I do this, when I rotate this way, I feel like a different sensation. It's different when I do it this way, and it feels better. It feels fantastic. I'm going to do more of that. Oh, this way it hurts my joints a little bit. I'm going to stay away from that. And so you can't read these things in a paper, any paper, because the paper is going to be on other people. It's going to be on a lot of people, but they're going to be outliers, and you might be an outlier in some regard. In fact, I would argue that every single person listening to this is an outlier in some regard of training because there are dozens and hundreds of variables going into that melting pot of training. And so, one way or another, you're not going to be able to just read the science and, hey, oh, this is what I should do, right? Like, you actually have to go in and be very, very observant and actually do things in the gym, right? And so this is where you have to marry the two things together. And all of the science-based guys that I follow and that I respect, they have that bro side to them, at least to a certain extent, right? Like it's kind of a continuum back and forth. But you look at Dr. Eric Helms, you look at Greg Nuckols, you look at Jeff Nippard, you look at Menno Henselmans. I mean, they've all, in a lot of cases, been lifters first, and then they kind of like wanted to optimize the progress through the science. But I think having that base of actually lifting is very, very important, because if you don't have that, yeah, you might read a study and be like, this is how you should do it. Whereas anyone who's lifted for a significant amount of time, they know that study is just ridiculous because no one does it that way. I mean, I've seen so many studies where it's just, you read the study and you're like, okay, this is just, no one does this. Like no one would ever do this. It's ridiculous. It's impractical. And so, yeah, I think having that base of actually having gone to the gym and done things is pretty darn important. And not everyone has that, right? Some people jump straight to social media, straight into the papers without really spending a lot of time in the gym. And sometimes these people are creating content, which is a little bit scary.
Yeah, I think you really did a great job of summarizing kind of the way I see the critiques against science-based lifters as well, and who I would deem as like the person that's been persecuted as such. Like, it's not Jeff Nippard, even though a lot of his videos, like, he uses science-based or what have you in the captions and captions of the thumbnails, the titles, that's the word. And I analogize what you said. I always think about learning to drive. Like, yeah, you kind of read textbooks, you pass a theory exam, like you learn enough to pass the exam, but you don't really know how to drive until years later, like you've kind of got into the thick of just driving on the motorway or wherever. Like you learn as you do it, and it's exactly the same way in the gym. I completely agree. And that's one of the things I had as like a note of, I view a science-based lifter as someone who's like scared to do anything that they feel like hasn't been verified by science. Like they will only follow, this study says this, or I don't know, they see you doing something that's again, you don't have a PubMed reference for, and they're like, yeah, they're critiquing you for it. You're like, fuck you, dude, it feels really good this way. Like, come on. I can still be evidence-based, and I much prefer evidence-based to like being science-based, because that takes in that practical experience, what you've seen with clients, that sort of thing. And it comes back to your initial point of like, hey, for example, Jay Cutler's often brought up, he wasn't thinking about reps in reserve, but he very rarely trained to failure. Like, he just trained to the point of where he was like, yeah, I fucked that muscle up, but if I keep going, it's probably not a good idea, maybe for me at least in this context. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good place for people to kind of think about when people are being critiqued. It's if you're thinking, oh, I'm doing something wrong as someone listening to science, it's how you apply it practically. Do you kind of, again, try and take a study and apply it exactly to your training plan, or do you use it like nudge you in a direction? It gives you kind of food for thought.
Yeah, I mean, I almost think science-based, it's not the base. And I think Atlas Power Shrugged on YouTube talked about this, where the base of your training is not science. Like, the base is kind of wisdom that has been passed down, and like, oh, just do this. This is reasonable. That's a good starting point. And then maybe you tweak things according to science, right? Like, oh, you read a study, but you wouldn't do the actual thing in the study, right? Like, if I see a study on 45 sets per week or 52, that might nudge my idea of what people can recover from. And I think it's interesting, and I'll keep up with it. But that doesn't mean I go and I put someone on that much volume, right? It nudges me in a direction, maybe, and it doesn't even nudge me very much, right? Because there's a lot of information floating around, and it's not the base. If you have science as your base, you're going to end up with a really weird base that has a lot of inconsistencies and impracticalities. And so I think science is more that layer on top, where maybe you're tweaking things, maybe something's a little bit more length and biased, right? And I'll give you an example. There's a few years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, where there was a study comparing preacher curls to incline curls. And preacher curls came out on top. And now I'm a big fan of incline curls. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. But I didn't stop doing incline curls. But I did get a lot of DMs from people who were like, why the hell are you doing incline curls? And I am naturally a very polite person and patient because I used to be a teacher. And so, I wasn't like, shut up, get out of here, or you don't know what you're talking about, because I could see myself saying the same thing to other people maybe 1 or 2 years into lifting, right? Where you're somewhere in that slope of the Dunning-Kruger, and you're really excited about lifting, and you're making really good progress, and you're reading a lot about it. And so you come across the study that says this, and then you see some other lifter doing not that, and you feel the need to correct them, right? Like I was kind of like a little bit of a know-it-all, probably 2, 3, 4 years into lifting. And so I kind of know the mentality of the person who's contacting me. And then like a year and a half later, there was a study saying the reverse. Oh, incline curls are better than preacher curls. Like actually, it was like a measurement thing, or one used MRI, the other one used ultrasound or something. And so the more recent study was better quality. And so, oh, incline curls are better than preacher curls. And, so I think you can't change your whole training plan based on one study, particularly as a lot of these studies are pretty small sample sizes. A lot of them are on untrained lifters. And so, I mean, if you get one genetic freak in one group, I mean, that could easily, and you have 20 people in the study or 10 people in the study, I mean, that can potentially skew the results. There's a lot more studies I've noticed where people are their own controls, right? So they have one limb doing one protocol, the other limb doing that, which I think that makes it a lot harder to critique, which is good because some of my content is critiquing the science, but I also just want science to get better, right? Like, of course, I would lose some source of content, but there's lots of stuff to talk about anyway. So I would prefer if science got better and then it could actually be applied to more lifters. I mean, if another one is if a study is on untrained lifters, and sometimes if there's no control, I mean, they'll grow off of a lot of things. I mean, some beginners grow off of cardiovascular exercise. I mean, they start to run and they start to get bigger legs, that kind of stuff. And so I understand why a lot of studies are on untrained lifters, because you need to be able to measure progress in order to see which group does better, obviously. And you're an advanced lifter, I'm an advanced lifter. They can't do like a 6-month study or an 8-month or a 12-month study. Plus, I don't know about you, I don't know if I would give up all of my training for the better part of a year. Like,
It's a
I don't
hard
know.
sell,
I
man.
think actually, I think actually Dr. Helms participated in a study. So hats off to him, because I don't know if I would be willing to do that. Um, and it's not like it would destroy your gains or something. You're still lifting hard.
Sure.
Usually they're pretty reasonable protocols, but I personally really like tinkering with my training. And so, yeah, giving that up would be pretty difficult. And I think a lot of advanced lifters are that way. And so finding people and then having the study that long, I think if you're an advanced lifter, maybe the science is just not the right place to look for what you should do. And so when someone's an advanced lifter and they say, "Oh, the science is not telling me what to do," well, the science is not really for you. And so I don't think that's actually a very good critique. It's more just to find the physiological underpinnings and what is going to work on average as a good starting point, compared to, hey, you know, world's strongest man competitor or whoever, what should you be doing, right? And so, I agree with a lot of the critiques of science, but telling advanced lifters what to do is not particularly reasonable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think to have got to the level to be advanced, you've had to have learnt yourself over the years and what's worked and what hasn't. And so you are your N=1 study. You've truly learned how to drive that car. And then
Yeah.
if there's someone outside in, again, with less experience, it'd be like, oh, my driving instructor said you shouldn't put it into like, first to third gear and skip second gear. Like you should always go into second. It's like, oh, dude, I've learned that my car works much better if I go straight to third. It's no problem if I get like whatever. I'm not a car guy. I don't drive, but I have learned to drive. I just have no car because I'm in London. But you kind of get the analogy of you learn how the car works over time and what works for you and how to like tweak it. And I'm the same way. Like I wouldn't want to give up my training, partly because I know how long it takes to make progress and how like I'm more than likely to reach a kind of age cap to gaining more muscle than anything else. So every session, every week, every month of training for me really counts. So I don't want to give any of it up that could be like quite a bit suboptimal to what I'm already doing. And as a science-based lifter, or like depends, just as a lifter, like you said, you're tracking your progress. So you kind of have an eye on what's actually kind of turning the levers for you. I think one of the things at least when I think about kind of science-based lifters and something I get frustrated with is more of like how it's communicated, and often without all those caveats that you mentioned and all the kind of, like the length of time, the training advancement, whether or not it's a within subject design and if that's ecologically valid and all of those kind of, I forgot what they're called, they're drawbacks. There's a word for it. And it's not necessarily the people you mentioned at all, like a Menno, an Eric Helms. It's more like people who are using science as almost like a bit of a marketing gimmick. It makes me think of like Kassem is, to me, like he's got his pulse on the biomechanics and he educates and can communicate it in an incredibly effective way. But sometimes people use bits of information from him and then make it into something else that's actually just like complete, like it's not the same thing anymore, just for that gimmicky social media, black and white kind of divisive content. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think the reason why Jeff Nippard or someone like a Jeff Nippard gets hate is just because they have such a big following. Usually it's not actually anything specific that he's done. It's just very general, like, oh, I don't like science-based for reasons we can get into in a second. Oh, Jeff Nippard, millions of followers, but it's, oh, you're small, or you don't know what you're doing, or you train hard, blah blah blah. But I don't think the people that we've mentioned are really getting a lot of hate. I think usually it's the people misusing science who give science a bad name. And, it must be tough because I guarantee you that the people who are actually science-based, they see the people misrepresenting studies or using clickbait or over-promising or not using caveats and nuance. They see that, and I know they see that, and it must be kind of tough to decide what to do. Do you just go full Lane Norton and call it out? Actually, it's kind of funny because Lane Norton doesn't even seem to call it out. He sticks to kind of specific topics that he calls out, but when it comes to, I guess, policing his own, you could say he doesn't really seem to get into that, which I understand why, because it's kind of difficult. There's a lot of like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, let's collab. And so if you call someone out, are they going to collab with you? Maybe you miss out on new views, subscribers, new revenue. You can kind of get almost like blacklisted. I don't want to call it a cult or anything like that, but certainly there are some aspects that make it look a little bit cultish, especially when you scroll down your YouTube page and you read some of the comments of like, they sound almost like they're viewing some of these individuals not as people, but as more than man, as like some kind of gods, and it can get really dogmatic. And so, I guess if you're a science-based creator, what do you do? Do you call it out super directly? Do you not talk about it at all? Do you talk about to them behind the scenes? Do you try to get them to say, to better their ways? I don't know. It's difficult. Do you say something a little bit subtly that some people get that it's a call out, but it's not really a call out? And so maybe you can still talk to them and bring them back from the precipice of misinformation. Because sometimes if you push someone and call them out, then they just double down and they just like, all right, well, screw it, and they go full clickbait and they don't even care anymore. So yeah, it's got to be a really difficult conundrum for some of these guys. And so, but you can usually tell who is legit and who is not based on how they speak and the nuances involved. And are they dogmatic? Are they willing to admit when they're wrong? Do they update their opinion with new information? Are they misrepresenting studies? Because, man, I have seen in recent months some studies being used where it can only be either gross ignorance or just someone being really manipulative. So the study might say one thing, and then they use it for something totally different, or they take it out of context, or the authors in the paper contradict what the influencer or whoever it is saying. And so, yeah, man, I've seen it all, and I personally err on the side of calling it out directly, but it seems like I'm one of the few who does that. I think partly because I'm not science-based, and I'm also not, like, I don't really think about things in terms of future collaboration. Like if it happens, it happens, but like I'm not gonna not make a video because like we might get in a workout in a year or two, right? Like it just doesn't make sense to me. That's not how I think. But yeah, at the same time, I wish there was more direct calling out, because if it's not called out, all the incentives point to clickbait and things that do well on social media, right? Like a lot of really good content creators, they're not really growing nearly as fast as the people who are willing to do whatever it takes with the title and the thumbnail. Yeah. And so it is tough not playing that game. And then if you do call out that game, to a certain extent, you might look salty, because usually that other person is actually growing faster because they are playing that game. And so it is quite a difficult situation overall. And then if you're a beginner or just a content enjoyer, it can be difficult to actually see who is legit. Like I can tell pretty easily, as I'm sure you can by now, because we've been around the space a lot. But if you're a beginner sort of trotting into fitness, I mean, it's so easy to get not scammed, but just overly excited by some of this content without realizing, yeah, maybe it's a little bit over-promising in a lot of cases.
One of the thoughts that comes to mind with this is it makes me think of like fake naturals. So people kind of purporting you can make these amazing gains if you just follow my program, my diet, whatever it is, or if they post their clients and it's like they just say it's all hard work and my amazing coaching. It's like, well, also all the gear that they're taking. And like you said, as educated kind of viewers with experience, we can kind of get a good idea of what's realistic naturally and what's not. And we have I think you're of the kind of same with me. We're not like, hey, someone like Babacar, who you might have seen, who won WNBF Worlds, like I legit 100% believe he's natural. Like he is an absolute just freak and a phenom.
Yeah.
So we're willing to accept that there are amazing Michael Jordan-esque physique type natural bodybuilders out there. So we don't think anyone bigger than us is enhanced for sure. But so you can still see it though, where there's fake naturals, and it's this way where it's misrepresenting science. And unfortunately, what you mentioned there, I think the reason a lot of people don't call it out, one, I think the people like an Eric Helms, for example, he's so damn busy doing his own stuff. He's so focused on what he's doing. It's also not in his character, even though it's like a Captain America, but it's not quite in his character. Whereas, for like, I think Brett Contreras had like the Guru, I can't remember what it's called, but it was like calling out gurus at one point. So he has kind of done a foray in there, like you said, Elaine Norton has, but he's kind of maybe a bit picky with who he calls out. But also I think for like someone like myself, when I see someone, for example, I know you called out, I've forgotten what her name is. She's the scientific snitch on Instagram. Yeah. She seems to be growing very rapidly. And I thought you did a great job. And I was like, oh, wow, good job. Like for you, because she was referencing studies for claims she was making. And I see her content. I'm like, I I think she's stepping beyond, like she's trying to sound very nuanced and sciencey to make a point that I don't really think she's making much of a point. Like, it's just like, what are you calling maintenance versus a surplus, things like this. But you picked out one of the references that she used, and you're like, this just doesn't really make sense with what you're saying. But most people, and me included, if someone just puts that up, like, I'm not digging into it. It takes a lot of time. So credit to you for like digging into it and like going through all of that, because I don't think most people will. And I think that's part of the problem, is not only are people not doing what you've just done there to check it, but the people putting up the PubMed links, maybe at best they're reading the title and the abstract. They're not digging into the study to know if it truly supports what they're saying. And so that's kind of a scary place to be if no one's fact checking these things.
Well, and it does take a lot of time. I think maybe it's a Mark Twain quote. Don't quote me on that. A lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth can put its shoes on, or something like that, which is, it's hard putting on your truth shoes, right? You could say a lie and just spit it out there, and then it gets picked up and the algorithms and yeeted across around the world. And then you got to sort of find it and sort of think, and for context, to put it out there, I watched her podcast with Jonathan Warren. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she's a very hard worker. Congrats to her for just getting her degree. But it was a bad study. It was a really bad study. So she tried to make it sound like bulking would give you more fat cells. The reality is the study had people at 35% body fat on average. I don't know any bodybuilding coach in the world who would get a client at 35% body fat and think, yeah, let's bulk. let's add on some body fat, no big deal. They were also in a 1,250 calorie surplus. Again, that's dirty. That's an aggressive bulk. That's on pace for, let's see, that's a couple pounds. That's like 10 pounds. That's about 10 pounds in a month, at least on pace for that. Yeah. And so it's actually interesting. They didn't gain that much weight. They gained less weight than you would expect based on the 1,250 calorie surplus. So if anything, this says, hey, if you get a massive surplus, your metabolism might compensate a little bit and you won't gain as much fat as you think. They were also pretty sedentary, from what I believe, based on their maintenance calories. Their FFMI, fat-free mass index, was like 18, 19, like basically untrained. They weren't lifting weights during this time. It was low protein. The calories were just oil added, just straight up oil, I think, to their diet. And so I don't think this has anything to do with the average lifter who's thinking about bulking. Any one of those points, oh, you're 35% body fat, disqualified. 1,250 calorie surplus, disqualified, because that doesn't, most people are like 200 or 300 calories, maybe 400 or 500 if you're a beginner and we're feeling frisky, right? Like and things are going well, you're hungry, okay, like maybe 400, 500, right? Let's maybe gain a pound a week. Even then, that's pretty aggressive. And so 1,250, that is like 2 or 3 or 4 times more than anyone really recommends. And then this being sedentary, not lifting weights. And so, I don't think you really need to worry about getting new fat cells from a reasonable bulk. If she had said, getting extra skin and stretch marks, I actually think that's probably more of a concern in a lot of cases, compared to fat cells. And so, I just don't think it was a good study. And then she challenged me to like a live debate. If I think there's something interesting to be discussed, and I think someone is acting in good faith, I don't have anything wrong with maybe frame it as a discussion rather than a debate. But man, if you try to use that study for those purposes, and then when you get called on it, you kind of double down or you don't address those criticisms specifically, I don't see the point in having any further discussion. Right? And again, I don't think she's a bad person, but I don't really think she's acting in good faith in this situation. And And yeah, so it's one of those things where I think people post rage bait on a lot of our videos. There are people saying they're commenting, "Oh, this is rage bait," and if the top comment is rage bait, it's probably rage bait. And so I think it's in a lot of cases just put out there to kind of piss people off and grow her social media, which she is doing so phenomenally successfully. But you can't expect no pushback. If you post that kind of content, you can't act like the victim when someone calls you on that BS. And so she's trying to say, "Oh, he's being a bully or something." I'm the nicest bully ever. Come on, like this is ridiculous. I could have gone way harder. I held back because I'm 35 years old and I have a little bit of wisdom at this point. If it was 10 years ago, I would have gone way harder than that. But um, yeah, the reality is what is popular is not always good, and what is good is not always popular. And you kind of have to choose where on that continuum you are. And I think it's pretty clear that she made her choice. And she can't admit it's rage bait, because if you admit it's rage bait, it kind of spoils the whole thing, right? You can't be angry at someone who you know wants you to be angry, right? It just takes all the wind out of your sails. You have to believe the other person actually believes it. And so she kind of has to keep up that facade, I think. But to me, it's just very obvious because I've seen this time and time again. And yeah, I don't think it's good to incentivize that kind of content with going into like, let's do a live debate. Like, yeah, let's have it on my channel. Let's have it on your channel. Let's have it on every channel, because then someone sees that and they think, "Oh, well, I'll just put out misinformation as well, and I'll grow my social media that way." And the whole space just becomes toxic and rotten.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I I should have thought about this really well. When the reason I was so quick and happy to kind of dismiss what she was saying is like, there's a lot of experts that I've spoken to in this space that I'm pretty sure would have seen this study and would have been talking about it and would have referenced it. For example, in Eric Helms, who literally in 2023 had his like surplus study, for example, like he would have been digging into this sort of thing. It's not like he is obsessed with bodybuilding and he's been talking about surplus size for the longest time and just referencing the Garth paper that we had. It's like, I think we would have seen this kind of come out. But the problem is, again, and why she's getting so popular is because it is diversive, it's new, it's novel. And then, yeah, people will start messaging you being like, "Oh, haven't you seen this? You shouldn't be bulking." And it's like, it's science-based. And then that kind of comes back to the point I was making where people are kind of bastardizing science in a sense. Like they're using it as a bit of a tool, a gimmick. And like you said, truly, maybe she's coming from a good place. Maybe she read it and misinterpreted it, and it was supporting some of her preconceived biases where she's like, I don't know, maybe she doesn't like the idea of bulking, and it's nice for her to think, "Oh, I can just gain lots of muscle without that," because we all have our own biases. I know I did for the longest time where I'm like, I don't know, you want to see an outcome within a paper or what have you. And when you don't see that, maybe you ignore it one side or you try and find something that confirms your bias. And that's not really being evidence-based. It's not being science-based, really. Or maybe it is in this case because of what we talked about.
Yeah. And yeah, I try to be, and this is another sort of nugget from Dr. Helms. I think it was on the Iron Culture podcast where he talked about the idea of being charitable and kind of not necessarily jumping to the worst conclusions right away about a person or about a piece of content, because I mean, I messed things up. I messed up interpreting Dr. Helms's own study on bulking. So, it goes round and around. And so, we all make mistakes. And I think there has to be room for forgiveness and redemption and all those nice things. But it has to start with the, "Oh, I messed up." Right. Like, I mean, with myself and Dr. Helms, I was, when I found out that I kind of misinterpreted things because I read a preprint, I was like, oh God, like, and I'd already published the video, and like it was kind of a fiasco, and I guess I got to talk to Dr. Eric Helms out of it, so that's kind of cool. But I think you have to recognize your mistake before anything, because if you just double down when it's so obvious that you're wrong, I don't know. At that point, it's just it becomes really difficult to say, oh, they just made a mistake when they're not admitting they made a mistake. And so, yeah, I hope she does. Again, I don't think she's necessarily a bad person. I think she's quite smart. My audience was not happy with her, but I also don't think that there's a need for personal attacks. This seems to happen with a lot of channels where, like, I call someone out, and then in the comments are like, yeah, yeah, his physique sucks. I'm like, what? That's not what. Where did that come from? Like, no, that's not what we're about here. Come on. And so, yeah, I try to. It's a fine line. You have to call stuff out and be assertive, but not be aggressive and not be. I mean, there's always the low road that you can take. So I try not to take that. And yeah, if anyone's in my audience and they're like leaving comments about this guy's physique or this guy's an idiot or look at this, I mean, it's just like be better than that. Okay, it's not that ain't cool.
Yeah, I respect you so much for that. That's why you're back on the podcast for the third time, because I think you do a great job of kind of, yeah, riding that middle ground, never taking it to just ad hominems and personal attacks, and just looking and basing it off the data. And I can really see at the forefront of your mind, you are just looking for the truth, the answers, what's going to help people the most. You aren't looking to, like, gain attention and grow your following and all of this, make as much money as possible. I think there's probably loads of opportunities you've passed up, or you could even go down, that just wouldn't jive with you, your morality, that sort of thing. And so I have a lot of time and respect for that, and I think that's where everyone should be. And again, Eric Helm's a great example of that too. So yeah, I think it's just ultimately really important to have that kind of background. And yeah, this is the thought I was having. So one of the things I use, I got from Berge, hopefully I'm saying his name fairly somewhat correct, people will know who I mean, the MyReps guy. Again, great individual. And he kind of just had this sense of, does it pass the real world test? If it doesn't pass the real world test, like, and how many people have we seen, like, bodybuilders have been quote unquote bulking for the longest time. And like, they would have stopped. They need to get stage shredded. So if there was a way they could do that without having to put on needless body fat, you can't tell me they wouldn't have tried to do it. These are like guys who are trying to be the best of the best in the world. So I think, like, I just think like that. Like, if someone's saying something that sounds too good to be true or sounds so different to what happens in the real world, and then I can see why people get so frustrated. And she's been on like debates with bodybuilders who are like, but this is how we've done it. I haven't listened to those debates, but I can get why they're so frustrated, but they don't necessarily have, I don't know, the level of, like, she's obviously intelligent, but that doesn't always mean you're right just because you're intelligent. There's people with PhDs who are like talking absolute rubbish on the internet. We know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's any correlation between educational status and morality. I haven't seen any either positive or negative. It just seems to be a pretty flat line between bachelor's, master's, doctorate, postdoctorate, and you're a good person. Like, there's just no real correlation. I mean, I could name dozens of doctors on YouTube who are just deceptive and manipulative, and then there are people with, I mean, I don't even have a bachelor's in a relevant field. So it's like, and so, yeah, I don't, and I try my best, right? So I don't think it's, you can look at, oh, he's a doctor, therefore blah, blah, blah. But to the average person, that does matter, right? And so they see a content creator in a lab coat and they think, oh yeah, that's great, that's fantastic, right? I can trust him. That has nothing to do with trust, right? And it doesn't even have a lot to do with the quality of the information in a lot of cases. And so, yeah, I mean, people need to be careful, and the real world sniff test is super important. And that's why I say it's not science based. Like, the science is that layer on top where maybe you change things or tweak things. But I've seen some kind of ridiculous protocols. Actually, Faz Lifts, really, really good channel, just past 10K. He talked about a guy who was doing 32 sets of lateral raises per week. And he's like, they're still not growing. Should I go to 40 or 50 or 60? And oh man, I mean, you can change other things too, man. Like there are other things besides volume, and I've been there, right? I mean, back in 2018, especially, I was doing 2018 to 2019. I was doing tons of volume, like really, really high. And this is where the volume papers were coming out, and people were saying, "Oh, like this is what drives hypertrophy." And I think science will find the answers eventually, but it's gonna kind of go back and forth, and there's gonna be some snaking around and some wiggling. Because I have noticed volume is being walked back over the past couple of years. Have you noticed that Mike Menser content has kind of been making a resurgence? I think that's like a direct answer to the high volume thing. A lot of people got burnt out doing kind of ridiculous amounts of volume. And then, the Menser content train, and Mike Menser's not even here to fuel this train, right? He's just like the icon of it. And so, oh, high volume didn't work. Well, just do one set, bro. Like that's what you were doing wrong. You were doing more than one set per week. Like that's what it was. And so yeah, I try usually the middle ground is actually the best answer. So like you can do 2 or 3 sets per exercise. Like you don't have to do 1 or 5. Like that's it doesn't work that way. I mean I got a question from a guy a couple days ago. He said, "Oh, I've been doing 5 to 8 sets per muscle group. Should I go to 20?" They're like thinking, what about 9 or 10 or 11 or all the way up to 19? Like, no, it's just 20. He's like, well, no, I heard high volumes. I'm like, oh my God, no, that's not how it works. And but I mean, I didn't say, oh God, that's not how it works to him. That was to myself. But I could see how someone might think that, just because if you don't have that experimental on yourself mindset of like, I'll try thing, maybe a little more, maybe a little more, maybe a little bit less, where you're just trying to titrate that dose and find exactly how much volume or exactly what technique or whatever it is. Yeah, you might just be swept up in super high volume and then super low volume, and then whatever the latest thing is, the lengthened partials or the shortened partials, or yeah, I mean, it's drinking milk when you work out, not, it's just, there's always going to be something new, right? There's always going to be, and I can almost see it in real time. It's like the stock market, right? Like there's this hype train and then it goes up and up and up and up. And, oh, new study. Oh, it's going down. Oh, no one does that anymore. Lengthened partials. What are you talking about? Oh, nerd. No one does that. That's so 2024. And so, yeah, I can kind of, at this point, I can kind of see it building, and I can see the next thing when the wave is kind of building, and then there's the tidal wave, and then it crashes, and then it subsides. Oh, and then the next one is coming. Oh, shortened partials. That's the new thing. Like tight contractions. Oh, if you're not getting a contraction, bro, you're just wasting the whole rep. And so, yeah, it's kind of fascinating to watch, but that's part of the reason why I don't let any new study or even a new meta-analysis or even like a new trend supported by a meta-analysis, I don't really let it sway me in either direction, because usually that pendulum swings back to the middle anyway. And so I'm just going to stay in the middle, maybe move a little bit back and forth, but not that much. And they can swing back and forth because I'm going to keep making those gains, baby.
Well said. Yeah, I think that's actually, I was going to ask you, what do you think like is the biggest thing that's hurting people in terms of that like science-based lifting content? And I think that, at least as far as I see it, it is that constant kind of pursuit for using science to give you answers. And it isn't, that's not what science is. And I don't think science is, and I don't think anyone really thinks science is the problem. It's the people who are using it inappropriately and applying it inappropriately. Like you said, they're swinging from one thing to the next. I'm waiting for comments on my training to be like, dude, why are you using lengthened partials? They're, like you said, they're so outdated. There's new evidence to support that they're no better than full ROM. I'm just like, well, because I'm listening to my own feedback and I'm seeing really good progress through this, and I'm not just going to jump ship because of, exactly. Like a couple of papers have come out to suggest this way. But similarly, when the first papers were coming out and it was basically calves, and then some people just changed their whole program to lengthened partials, like that maybe is a little bit too soon. Like, we just get nudged and try experimenting slowly, gradually, and listen to your own feedback. And again, I think it's too often people are looking for answers, again, in the science where, like you said, there's so many limitations to the science and its averages, and we could be outliers. And they're not looking enough at their own logbook, like, and be their own scientist of like, hey, what I'm doing is currently resulting in really good gains. Why are you then looking to change something just for the sake of it, just because of one random paper that maybe has no relevance to you at all?
Yeah. I mean, you see this in the extreme where I've had DMs from people who haven't started lifting, and yet they're trying to like, I mean, I can't even write you a plan if you don't have a training history. Like, what am I, what am I going to do? It just, there's nothing to go off of, right? That's where your own experience is the base, right? Like, I'm not going to write you a plan based in science. Like, where do you even start? I don't even know. You would just give everyone the same plan. It just doesn't even. And so, yeah, if you're a beginner, just hop on something really basics, tried and true. I mean, if you do starting strength, that's not the end of the world, right? I don't think it's ideal, but you have your squats, you have your bench, you have your deadlift, maybe toss in some curls. You're going to do that anyway. Toss in some extensions, maybe a few laterals, maybe mix up the rep range a little bit. I mean, maybe there's an idea for a program like starting jacked or something, but just do something. Do something, keep a training log, work hard, be observant, because you're not going to get the answers from a paper. You're probably not even going to get the answers from you or me or someone who has a lot of experience, right? Like, that's where even as a coach, you're just guiding someone along. You're not telling them, oh, this is how it's going to work the whole way, right? Like, because you have to get that information during the process, right? In order to make adjustments, whether it's to volume or exercise or technique or whatever it is. And so, yeah, I notice a lot of people, they're scared to even start. I think that's what it is, right? Like, if you're starting a business, just kind of go with a minimum viable product and then change and adapt as you go. But you wouldn't read 50 business books and like call a bunch of experts and spend a whole bunch of money like trying to find out the way to start a business and how to optimize it and like pay people for the optimized business plan or anything before you even start. I mean, it just doesn't, but that's how a lot of people are thinking, because I think it's almost like the genetic question, which I get asked quite a lot as well, right? Like, I'll get someone send me their picture and they're a beginner and they say like, how good are my genetics? What? I mean, but to them, they want to know the answer. They want to know the outcome before really anything, because they almost want to know, is lifting worth it? I think that's what it is. And the answer is yes. Yes, lifting is worth it. Even if you don't get jacked, it's still worth it, right? It's not like other pursuits where, okay, maybe you start playing chess and you suck at chess. Oh, I don't become a grandmaster. Oh, I wasted my time. Well, first of all, if you enjoy playing chess or you enjoy singing or you enjoy dancing, people don't go into those thinking, oh, but what if I don't become a world-class ballerina, right? I mean, you just do it because you enjoy it. You do it because you like it. You do it because you love it. And then maybe it turns out you're really good at it. Or maybe not. But either way, it's not time wasted. But for lifting, for some reason, people think it's time wasted if you don't get really, really jacked. And those people, they never become really, really jacked because they're the ones who don't start at all, right? So you kind of have to roll the dice. And guess what? Even if you're rolling your D20, here's a Dungeons & Dragons reference, Dr. Helms, just for you. You paladin, you. I know what class you are. Lawful good, baby. So you're rolling your D20. Even if you roll a 1 on your genetics and you critically miss, you are still better off for having lifted. It's better for your health. It's better for your physical and mental health. It's something that even if you don't have a standout physique, you're going to be healthier. You're going to be happier. You're going to be stronger. You're going to be more useful. You can help your neighbors move. I mean, you're going to be just a better person for it. So it's not wasted time, even if you don't become Ronnie Coleman.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. Additionally, you get access to our exclusive Revive Stronger member site, where you'll be able to watch over hundreds of hours worth of educational content. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Yeah, this whole discussion regarding
Pascal might find
science.
that entertaining.
Sorry?
Pascal might find that entertaining.
But possibly. Yeah, I find this whole discussion reminds me of this book I'm listening to for the next time, and it's called Same as Ever. I can't remember the author of it, but he's basically just, I mean, it is as it says, same as ever. It's a case of like, when you think there's loads of complexity, things are really, really changing, most of the time, like it's just the same. And he kind of talks about how like complexity sells better. And actually there's just a handful of simple variables that drive the majority of outcomes. And a lot of the time, whatever gets added after the basics is just unnecessary filler, and talks about how like complexity is intellectually seductive, designed to confuse or impress you or waste your time. And just there's so many elements of, especially using science in a bastardized way incorrectly, that I think it is that kind of complexity, it is that difference that makes it really interesting to people. But yeah, he kind of talks about like there's no points awarded for making things hard. Like you can try too hard. And a lot of the differences that people kind of have disagreements about are related to just their personal experience and not actually like the big principles. Like they always agree on the bigger principles. It's just like the little minutia that ultimately doesn't really drive much difference. So yeah, I think it just that whole discussion reminds me of that. And another one is, I don't know where I heard this actually. I think actually this is another book I'm listening to, Hidden Potential. And you kind of talked about it here, where people are sending you pictures for their genetics. And he was essentially saying, hey, like you can't tell where people will land from where they begin, was the quote. So it's just a case of like, you can't look at someone before they start training and know, hey, you have loads of potential, because you're not going to, you have to see how they respond. And then sometimes you get people that respond really quickly, and then some people are a slow burn. I can even use myself as an example. Like my first like 5, maybe even 10 years of lifting, you'd look at me and be like, yeah, like pretty darn average. But like I put another 5 years on top of that. It's like, oh, like, okay, now I've turned pro within like the biggest natural federation in the world, which is pretty cool. And maybe that is just like, I don't think anyone would have thought, oh, you have the potential to go pro. I didn't even think it. And I didn't even think it the year that I turned it. Like I didn't think it was going to happen. But it was just a case of putting in that daily effort and work, and you kind of see it through. And I was just focused on all the benefits outside of the kind of the result and outcome that it gave me, which you mentioned. But yeah, I think like you said, people want to know what results they're going to get too soon. It's like, to bring it back to investing in the stock market again, like you can't be sure. Again, average, if you invest in the S&P, you're going to get like an 8%, maybe 10% return at the end of the year. But like you can't necessarily know if you're average either. So you just kind of have to put yourself in the mix, try, fall flat on your face, learn, or get a great coach like yourself. Maybe at Revive Stronger, you can pick one of us up and we can like guide you a little bit more effectively. But there's nothing around putting in the work. There's no secret science they're going to tell you tomorrow that are going to expedite your gains like 10 times, even if, I don't know, someone tries to claim that they are.
Yeah. And there was actually another content creator who made a video on me, a natty or not, one of those. And one of his pieces of evidence was actually in my before picture. he's like, oh, he doesn't have the genetics in my before picture. It's like, okay, well, yeah, tell me you don't know how genetics work without telling me you don't know how genetics work. Because yeah, you don't really know. Maybe you can have some kind of inkling. I mean, you look at pictures of like Kevin Levrone or Ronnie Coleman when they were really young. So I think if you're a freak, yeah, like before lifting, you might look a little more muscular than average. Um, but I think beyond that, which is super rare, obviously by definition, freaks are like 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, 1 in 1 million, or something like that. Um, yeah, no one could have looked at me before lifting and been like, I mean, maybe like the waist a little bit, but you know, obviously the arms were like, I don't know how big my arms were when I started lifting. I didn't take measurements. And if you're getting into lifting, you think you might be in it for the long term, I would take measurements. It's just interesting. It's easy to do. You can look back on that and say, oh, this is when I had 10-inch arms or whatever. I don't know how big my arms were. They were probably 11 or 12 inches, maybe. And so sometimes you can see like muscle bellies before people start lifting. And I think you can see the response. Dorian Yates, 8 months into lifting, I mean, he looked ridiculous. I mean, just like, I'm assuming he's natural in the picture that I saw, but I'm not 100% sure of that. And I don't think he actually said either way. So maybe it was 8 months into lifting and lasting, and that could actually explain it. But either way, just like the shape and the amount of muscle, and I mean, he stayed lean apparently the entire time. And he said one time, oh, before my first show, I got really sick, but I ended up just getting really shredded. I'm sitting there thinking, man, when I get sick, I just kind of look bloated and I'm tired and I feel like crap. He's like, yeah, I sweat out all my water and I just felt amazing. I was like, what? This does not even make sense. And so I think on either end of the bell curve, some really weird things can happen. On that little tiny 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, just the people who, I mean, they could do almost anything and just get ridiculous results. But then also there's people, and statistically, it's probably not even anyone watching this, but there are people who they're going to really struggle to gain muscle, right? So when someone's like, genetics don't matter at all, like, yeah, they very clearly do. If you've coached a whole bunch of people, you've seen a range of responses, but you can't really predict that very well. I mean, maybe if you had their family tree or something, and it's like bodybuilder, football player, it's just, okay, well, maybe let's roll the dice on this one. But yeah, without that or without some kind of genetic test, you don't really know until you're a few years into it. And even then, this idea that you're done after 5 years, or I've even seen 3 years, right? If someone's making progress after 3 years, it must be drugs or something, which is like, it's just not true. I mean, it sounds comforting because the people who plateaued after 3 years can be like, well, I guess it's not my intelligence or my problem solving. It's just, that's what happens. Like, it's normal. No, it's not normal. Like, you should be making progress at 5 years. You should be making progress 8 years, 10 years, and probably at 15 and maybe even 20 years as well. And so it's going to be slow progress. But the idea that you're just done, I just don't see that. And so people ask me, oh, how much more muscle are you going to gain? 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, like somewhere in that 5 to 15 pound range, probably. But it's impossible to say for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, really well said. I have had that with clients or potential clients on like consults or messages where they're like, hey, if I do this, like how much muscle could I gain? And I'm like, I can give you a theoretical answer based on averages, but it's like, how long is a piece of string essentially is going to be the answer, because I don't know how well you're going to adhere to this. Like, I don't know what your genetic response is. I don't know how stressful your lifestyle is. Like, all of these variables, there's just too much to consider there. And I think it comes back to like trying to focus more on the process, less on the outcome, all the health benefits and everything that training is going to give you. And so you should do that. And if you aren't enjoying part of the process, change it so you can enjoy it, even if it means it's less like science-based, like, if you will, like it could be more optimal for you. It helps adherence, enjoyment. You're going to put more effort forth, all those sort of things. So I think a lot of people are scared, like, who follow science-based information and content too strictly to kind of, like, I think you're encouraging them, and I try to encourage people, like, don't get lost in the weeds of that, draw it back and see where you're reaping enjoyment and results, because that's probably going to be sustainable. And hey, muscle growth is, like you said, it doesn't end after 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's just really slow. But for a long time, we can kind of get that. To change subject a little bit, Geoffrey, because I know you just finished a mini cut, which I think is interesting, because you only ran it for 2.5 weeks, which by definition is shorter than even a mini cut, because it's 3 to 6 weeks. No, I'm joking. Right. I just tend to, that's what people hear, like 3 to 6 weeks. So you did like a mini cut, 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
And you dropped nearly 10 pounds. So like a real hefty amount of weight. So I'd like to hear, first of all, like, what made you pull the trigger on the mini cut? And then do you change anything when you run it, go through it? What is nutrition, training, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I would say a pretty good portion of that weight loss was probably just food, gut content, and water. Like when you're bulking hard, I mean, I got up to 106.1 kilos. So I think 230, almost 235 pounds.
You're 6'2", 1?
6 feet, 6 feet even.
Feet, okay.
Yeah, and like an actual 6 foot, 6.5 inch. I know 6 foot, it kind of encompasses like, just under as well in a lot of cases. And so, I probably got up to like low 20% body fat. So I was carrying around a lot of extra fat cells from the bulk. Yeah. But you are carrying around a lot of extra water, extra bloat. And so I probably lost, the first week, maybe 5 pounds or something. Right. And so super easy mini cut. I've always been a believer in lower meal frequency. So I don't eat much in the morning. And then I go train around 2 p.m. And then I get back and I have like my first big main meal and then maybe a smaller one later in the evening. And I'm still getting in, I would say, like 4 or 5 protein feedings. So I might have like a casein or whey protein powder in my coffee. It's like a mocha. It sounds terrible when you say it, but it's actually pretty decent. And so I have protein in the morning. It's not completely fasted, although I have been doing something related to that, which I might get into in a second. So it's not like total intermittent fasting. I do like having a little bit of a protein spike in the morning. I think that's probably a little bit better, maybe marginally. And then I have, for a while, I was having chocolate milk, a liter of chocolate milk during my workout.
Peak mass, yeah.
I don't think is a good blanket recommendation, but I enjoy it. And I have like, I don't know what is up with my digestive system, but it is amazing. It just, anything, it's like, it does not care. It processes it. It is like, my appetite is always there. Even when I was up to almost 235, my appetite was still, I know for you tend to like not feel good at all. But for me, like I could have gone 240. I could have gone 250 probably, but it's like, at a certain point, you don't really like how you look and you'll feel like you're rocking it, like the shirts are tight and you're just sort of full everywhere. But then like one day you'll look at a video and be like, yeah, no, that's not what I want. That's not what I signed up for. And so, yeah, around 235, but every bulk I get to that point, and every time I get to that point is a little bit heavier in body weight. So that's kind of like a good sign. But I also know when I'm a little bit too heavy. Also, my wife will tell me, she'll say, it's just straight up, honey, you're getting fat. And like, that's the barometer. It's exactly where it should be as well. It's like maybe 22, 23% or something, which is higher than a lot of people go. But for me, like it's obviously worked pretty well. And then I get back and I have my sort of main big meal. Again, I have a pretty big appetite, but I also don't count calories. That big meal could be, that could be 2,000 calories right there. Like I have no problem putting away that in a single, probably in 15 or 20 minutes, just down pretty quick. And then maybe I'll have a meal later and then perhaps a protein shake with my creatine before bed. So that's my sort of general setup. And usually if I'm mini cutting and I'm being aggressive, I'll bump up my step counts a little bit. But this time I wasn't really too aggressive with things, probably like 8K, maybe 10K. last cut I got up to like 20, 25, and that was
Oof.
like,
You have to go out your way
that
for
was
that.
rough. I didn't set it up in the best way because I was doing all my walking directly after training when also shredded. And so I was getting in like 2 hours of walking after a leg day and stuff. It was just not, it was just, it was like, it was the only time of day I had energy. Like I wake up and just have no energy, and then I would go train, and then I would feel like I could do something after I trained. And so I wouldn't really recommend that. It was a little bit excessive. I wouldn't say, and I still wouldn't say that I lost muscle even in the last week or two. But sleep was just absolutely crushed. I was getting 3 or 4 or 5 hours a night, and just it was rough. It was rough. So I was a lot more moderate, and I did lose 10 pounds, but I probably could have lost more as well if I was a little bit more aggressive. It was super easy. But one thing I've been trying out more recently, I've done 2 3-day fasts. So totally fasted, not eating anything for 3 entire days. So I would have my last meal in the evening, and then the next day I had a day off. So I wouldn't eat the entire day on the day off. And then on the second day, I had a leg day, but I really cut the volume down. I did like one set of RDLs, one set of leg press, a couple of sets of cable crunches, and then I was actually surprised how well I performed in terms of the numbers and how I felt, because you're less fueled, but I think you have more catecholamines and adrenaline and just focus going on, and so I actually performed really well. And then the third day, I didn't eat again, and then I went to train. I had like a full upper body day, and then I came home and I broke the fast. So it was a 72-hour fast, and I've done 2 of those so far. And obviously, your body weight drops pretty precipitously. Yesterday, I weighed in at 97.5 kilos, like 215 ish. And so, but you do get a bit of a rebound, obviously, because you're at that point, just you have no gut content really, and you're just a little bit dehydrated. And I think you're supposed to take in electrolytes. I didn't, I didn't really do that. I had a little bit of salty water. Like I kind of had cravings for salty, so I had like an old salt shaker in the pantry, and so I'm trying to like shake the salt because it had like stuck up, and I'm like, this is some feral bullshit that I'm doing that I know, but and so I'm like trying to get the salt to unstick, and then I dropped some of it in the water, and I felt a little bit better after that. But overall, it was really easy. It was a lot easier than I had expected. Um, I'd like to thank Atlas Power Shrugged and Uncommon Sense Fitness for being really supportive and like encouraging me, because originally I was going to do a 2-day fast, and then they were like, "No, you can keep going. Like if you feel good, you can just keep going." And the third day was the easiest. I think a lot of people expect, oh, like you're just going to get hungry and hungry and hungry until you die. No, like you sort of break through, and then I think your body's like, all right, well, I guess we'll just use body fat, right? And I wouldn't do this if I was shredded. If I was below maybe 12%, I would not do this. I think at that point, maybe 12, maybe 10, maybe 14, somewhere in there. I think everyone has their own sort of range where the body is not going to really put up with this. It's just maybe that's where you lose muscle. That's where you lose a lot of performance. That's where you really, not going to do well with it. But I'm still like near 20%, probably 18, 20, somewhere around there. And so I was totally fine with it. Also, keep in mind, I have a history of intermittent fasting. So I'm used to this lower meal frequency. And so my body was kind of just like, oh, well, we're not getting dinner either. This kind of sucks, but we can keep going. Where if someone is used to eating like breakfast, mid-morning snack, lunch, mid-afternoon snack, dinner, second dinner, if you're a hobbit or whatever, then like, yeah, you're probably going to have a rough time with it because your body is just missing so many meals, and you're getting that ghrelin response every meal you miss. And so it's just like getting kicked in the crotch a bunch of times. For me, it's like getting kicked in the crotch a little bit once, and then I was kind of like fine past that point. I didn't really do it for the fat loss. Obviously, I did lose a pretty good amount. It was more just almost to see if I could do it, just for the challenge of the experience. I'm not sure if it'll become like a staple for me, but it has kind of changed my mind a little bit on. I mean, I hit a set of incline dumbbell curls PRs. I did 50 pounds for 11 the day after I broke the fast. So I don't think I lost any muscle or anything. Performance has been fine since then. And so, yeah, overall, a positive experience. And I think people can maybe experiment with trying a lower meal frequency, maybe not 3 days of no eating right away, but I think the evidence is becoming pretty clear. You don't need to eat 6 times a day to maximize muscle growth. Probably not even 4 times per day. Maybe get in your 4 protein feedings, but you don't necessarily need to be pounding food all the time. When people are like, eating's the hardest part, maybe if you're pushing up against that threshold, yeah, but yeah, I don't think you necessarily need to be eating super frequently unless that is what you have to do to get in the calories. Yeah, I think in that case it's important. But if you have a big appetite, like me and like a lot of people, I mean, lower meal frequencies, I think, are the way to go, just because, man, if I'm eating 6 times a day and having like 400 or 500 calories per meal or something, that just does not sound appetizing or enjoyable at all. So, yeah.
Thank you for that very in-depth update on like your nutrition there. That's interesting. So obviously with the fast, I get it. You just kind of wanted to try it, see how it went, kind of learn from it. I've never even fasted. This is the closest I've done to intermittent fasting is what I'm doing at the moment, where I push back my breakfast, where I basically would normally have 4 meals. I have 3. So I just skip breakfast. Yeah. So it leads to like, I don't know, what is it? Normally 16 hours and then 8-hour eating window. It's more like a 14-hour fast or something like that. And I have like a 10-hour eating window or something. So yeah, I've enjoyed that. Just like in the morning, just getting to work, and now I'm like in prep, and obviously post show, my appetite's really good. But when my appetite hits against a wall, I then just have to pick and choose my battles. Like whenever I can eat, I need to eat, basically. Yeah. But it's like you said, so this kind of fasting approach, and I agree with you completely, probably wants to be done when you're at a body fat that the body is very happy to be at, like higher ends. Yeah, for sure. So you kind of got those energy stores on your body. If you're not eating, it's got something to eat in a sense. So that makes a ton of sense. And in that way, it creates a kind of calorie deficit. When you went through the mini cut on its own, did you just kind of clean up the diet? Is that how you kind of created that energy deficit?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I would say I have a healthier diet now than I did like 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, it was like more of like an eat big to get big, like seafood diet, a little bit dirty. But I would say I'm now 35 years old, and sort of, I think as you get older, you do prioritize health a little bit more. So my diet is already fairly healthy, I would say, but I also do know the energy density of foods. I think actually counting calories was very helpful for me, because I can still eyeball portion sizes, and I know, oh, this food, even just looking at it, I can tell, oh, that's high in fat. I can see the oil, the grease, like the shimmer on it. And so I can tell, okay, well, maybe that's not a good choice during this phase. I can switch it out for something a little bit drier, right? So something a little bit lower in fat. Because usually the fat, I find, it's just 9 calories per gram. It just adds up faster. I don't find it to be as filling. And so I tend to cut out probably more fat than carbs, probably because I train pretty high volumes. I do like carbs, and I do respond well to carbs. And so I try to keep those in as much as possible, because I do find that they are quite useful and helpful and productive. And so I would say I tend to go a little bit lower in fat, but I'm also not like fat phobic. I've seen some people, this was back during the cookbook era, where I would see people eating like 20 grams of fat per day. I'm like, how do you even do that? Like that's impressive to only get 20 or 15 grams of fat. And it's like the specific foods, the bodybuilder foods, just the chicken with no fat on it, and then the rice, and then the broccoli, everything steamed, nothing fried, nothing in oil, nothing. I mean, one guy was like, should I take fish oil? Because that might put me over. I'm like, come on, man. Like but man, if you have 15 grams a day and you're slamming 5 fish oil capsules, that's a third of your fat. And so I don't go nearly that extreme. But I would say I do cut fat down more than carbs, but I also cut carbs down noticeably as well. I'm not really a believer in oh, you've been bulking and then you gradually transition into a cut. I go right into a cut. I'm just like, okay, now I'm cutting day one. And so I might go from like a small surplus to 1,000 calories or more in a deficit. But I'm totally fine with that because my body is happy with that. Because once you've been bulking for a while, and I'm sure you know this, you're just like, okay, this is actually nice. This is actually quite,
Yes.
this is a refreshing, right? And so you feel better. Training is not impacted at all, right? When I hear people who have been bulking and they start cutting, they're like, but what about my performance? Like, your performance should be fine. You should actually probably still be progressing in most cases. Maybe the barbell bench is going to be a little bit tougher just from leverages, but for most lifts, yeah, if you're bulked up and you start a mini cut, like you should still be doing pretty darn well in the gym. And so, yeah, performance was maintained pretty darn well. And I dropped like 10-ish pounds over 2.5 weeks. But again, a pretty good chunk of that was bloat. And so things went well, very, very easy. And once you've done things a lot, you just, it's so easy. You just, oh, now I'm doing this. And then you just make the adjustments. And so even if I don't count calories, I know what mode I'm in and what my body needs and what I have to do. And then I just stick to it. And again, once you've done it, you have systems in place, you have mentalities that you've developed. And so you can just sort of almost set it and forget it. And it didn't really take any mental effort at all. It's just, oh, now I do this. And then you just sort of follow through. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm one of those guys where I just like having the numbers and just I just track year round. It's just like, it's a habit. And yeah, I kind of get a sense of less stress from kind of knowing where I'm at and having that available. But similarly, you mentioned like having those habits and knowing what you need to do. Like, I know exactly if someone was to remove that, MyFitnessPal, whatever it is, and remove the scale, like, yeah, I could get into a big deficit, no problem. Like, that's going to be easy. And it wouldn't be a crazy excessive one either, because like once you've seen the matrix, you just see the numbers, right? You've seen through the matrix in a sense, like that meme. The question I have for you is 2.5 weeks. Why only 2.5 weeks? Was that, what was the end goal? Were you trying to hit a certain scale weight number, or?
No, I kind of just wanted to clean things up. And I was going to go back to bulking. But then I was kind of like, oh, let's try this fasting thing. And then now I'm sort of in a little bit of a limbo because I go back to my wife's hometown here in China in 6 or 7 days for Chinese New Year. And so that's my like training break for the year. So ideally I probably would have like bulked into that the whole way and then used that as like a sort of training break. But I also like, I knew I was getting a little bit too fluffy. And so I wanted to just sort of bring things down a little bit. And then the fasting thing, yeah, probably not the most opportune time because I had okay training, but just because you have okay training doesn't mean it's productive training, right? Like just because you perform doesn't necessarily mean that you were making progress, right? Like you look at a power lifter, oh, they taper for a meet and then they have their maximum performance, but that doesn't mean that they're making better progress because they tapered, right? Like if anything, they probably would have reached a higher endpoint if they didn't taper and peak. And so, you know, if I had probably not fasted and kept bulking all the way into my training break, that would have been ideal. But like it was something that I wanted to try and I was kind of curious about. And it's almost like an investment of another tool in my toolbox that maybe I'll use again. I kind of like the idea of a 48-hour fast in some ways. I know that I could go longer. I'm sure I could go 4 or 5 or 6 days. Like I don't think that would really be a problem. The issue is that I like to train frequently. And so I don't really want to have like a leg day and then an upper day and then an arm and shoulder day and then another leg day and then another, and have that all be fasted. I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. Like just training pretty high volume and pretty hard, and then just not getting any food for a long time. Like, to me, that just doesn't make sense in terms of making progress. And so maybe I'll keep it in as like total fast on a day off, and then like get in food before a training session or something. Because one thing that I did notice, the response to food after a 3-day fast is quite interesting, right? Like you feel your body filling out almost like it's
Sounds like
I don't know
peak
if this
week.
is the same after a bodybuilding show. What's that?
Sounds like you deplete and then go into like a refeed phase or a glycogen replenishment phase in a peak week. It sounds similar. Like you can feel the carbohydrates, like your body soaking them up.
Yeah. It was a really weird sensation because I've never done, I've gotten lean, but I've never really done that kind of depletion and refeeding. But like you get really hot and like you could see the vascularity and stuff. Like it's a cool feeling. I will say that maybe I should have been a little bit more careful with the refeeding. It's not like anything happened. Again, that digestive system never lets me down, but I could like feel my heartbeat in my stomach and stuff. And it's like, this feels interesting. And it's almost like you eat a whole bunch of food at Thanksgiving and you have like, you're just sort of lying there. You're like, this actually is less enjoyable than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And so I would probably go a little bit, actually Atlas Power Shrug did warn me about that. And I probably should have listened a little bit more, but sometimes you have to make the mistakes yourself and then figure it out later.
You mentioned it as a tool outside of just allowing you to get into a greater calorie deficit because you're reducing your eating window. What other benefits are you seeing from this? Because it sounds like you might utilize it more frequently.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't, I haven't thought about it that
Too close to it.
Yeah, exactly. I would want to. I only have 2 data points. I've done 2 3-day fasts, and so I know that performance holds up under those conditions, which means that muscle loss is extremely unlikely. You could maybe make the argument of, oh, you got neurally more efficient, but you lost muscle. But like I've been doing these movements for years. I don't think there's really all that much neurally to be gained. Maybe adrenaline from the fast or something. I don't know. Maybe. But I think it's pretty clear that muscle loss was not really a concern. So that's interesting. I think the only time I would really use it would be when I'm fairly bulked up. And so if I'm trying to get lean, I don't know how much I would. I think that's where you want to eat a little bit more frequently just because you have less energy availability. You're into that sort of red state where you have low energy availability. And so I think at that point, it just doesn't make sense. I will say that hunger was very interesting because it does kind of come in waves, right? Like you'll reach your normal dinner time on day 2 and you'll be like, your body will know that something should happen. And so it'll make you hungry because it knows sort of that 24-hour biological clock. And so, but then it'll pass and you'll be fine. And getting to sleep was actually easier than I thought it would be because that was my big concern. And so I would say I felt better at 18 or 20 or whatever percent body fat and eating nothing compared to 8 or 9% body fat and eating in a small deficit, which is pretty crazy. And I think a lot of people maybe focus on the surplus or deficit a little bit too much without thinking about the state that they're in. So if you've been bulking for a long time and you're fed and hormones are normalized and regularized and you have lots of body fat on your body enough, and then you start eating very little, like that is a very different physiological state compared to, oh, I'm almost shredded and I'm eating in a tiny deficit, like a small deficit, maybe 400 or 500 calories, because that's all I can really do. And so those are wildly different states. And so this kind of goes back to like the 35% body fat situation. I mean, yeah, you're very fed at 35% body fat. And so yeah, you can't take a study on someone who's that high and try to apply it to people who are much, much leaner. And so in terms of how to use it, I'm not entirely sure. I think if anyone's like, oh, build muscle using fasting, that's a little bit hard to judge. I mean, you could say like, oh, there's growth hormone. Oh, maybe there's autophagy. I don't know. Maybe there's some kind of hormone. But I think in general, I wouldn't really view it necessarily as a muscle building tool. Maybe a fat loss tool at the end of a bulk if you want to just sort of get things out of the way. But I almost kind of viewed it as an interesting challenge, and I'll probably do it again at some point. But I don't really have like a definitive answer as to how I would use it as of yet.
I think that's fair. Yeah, it makes me think of things like a Ramadan where they go without eating for like large scales of time and also drinking. And just part of that is the challenge of it and the lessons that teaches you, and just these intermittent periods of like restriction. It's like yin and yang kind of relationship. It makes you appreciate when you're fed. So bodybuilders in some sense do this anyway, because we go through that horrific comp prep, and then we have like the beautiful honeymoon periods and then peak mass. It's like, so yeah, there's all these angles. But
we don't need
interesting nonetheless, for sure. Yeah, arguably not so much. But Geoffrey, if there's anyone who isn't following you, where should they be heading? This has been a great chat, and I'm sure I'll be bringing you back on. But if people are like, hey, I want more of GVS, where should they head?
I would say YouTube is the best place for like longer form stuff. And then Instagram is where I usually post my workouts. So I'll post like little short clips of a voiceover or just a working set or two or something like that during a workout. So either way, Geoffrey Verity Schofield, I believe, on both of them. And then verityfit.com for all my books and writings and that kind of stuff.
I keep saying Geoffrey and I should be saying Jeffrey, and I keep getting it wrong. it's like a thing for me with names. Like I forget names and then I can't say them right anyway. So it's just Jeff is like GVS even. Just go down that route. Or you need one of those like Atlas Power Shrugged. Like we don't even know your name. Like you just go by whatever handle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll make sure. Yeah, exactly. I'll make sure everything's linked in the description so people can kind of head and check those things out. And yeah, I will say your stories, clearly you put quite a bit it feels like you put quite a bit of effort with the voiceover and everything like that. I actually don't even know how you do that. So good work on that. And I think people enjoy this. And thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you in the next one.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.